This is Lee. Today I'm going to do a video that shows how you can make an image that looks kind of like this using Inkscape. So this is basically, putting circles, and sometimes you see these in fancy monograms or swirly designs. So this would be taking circles that decrease in size and putting them on kind of a swirly path. Um, there's a couple of ways to do this. A lot of the ways to do this end up distorting your circles. So this is a technique that I found that doesn't distort the circles too much, depending on how you do it. This is an image actually that I imported. But you can see there might be a little bit of distortion here, and it depends on how curly your line is. But in general, they look pretty good. They look pretty much like circles. So I'm going to show you how to create something like this. Now this uses a couple of techniques that probably a lot of people have never used before. The first of these is under Edit, and it's Clone, Create Tiled Clones. I have a couple of other videos that use Create Tiled Clones. It's a really useful tool. It's fairly complicated, and you have to play around a lot with it to really understand what all it will do. It'll do a ton of things. Another thing we're going to use is the Bezier tool. Now, probably everybody has used the Bezier tool in this normal mode here where you just create paths, okay? But we're going to actually use this second setting here, which is create spiro paths. Okay, so I'll show you how to do that. And then the last technique is going to be under extensions, generate from path, and pattern along a path. Probably a lot of people have used that. But I'm going to show you how to use it with this. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is make a circle. So I'm going to click on the circle tool, and I'm going to hold down, I'm going to turn my snapping tools off first by clicking on that top one there. I'm going to hold down the Shift and Control key and just draw a circle. Okay? Let's make these a different color. I'm tired of red. Alright, so now we have a circle. Now what we want to do is we're going to make a straight line of circles that decrease in size from left to right. So to do that, we're going to use the Make Tiled Clones. So Edit, Clone, Create Tiled Clones. I'm going to set this, I'm going to reset it, and this should be how it pops up if you've never opened it before. So in the first tab is Symmetry, and this will do a lot of cool things, but for this, what we want is just the very first one, Simple Translation. For Shift, we're going to use this in a minute, but I'm going to leave it the way it is for now to show you the difference when you make a change in this tab. Scale's the main one we're interested in. We want the scale of the circle to decrease as it goes along in the columns. We're not doing any rows. Rows would be going down this way. Columns go across horizontally. So we want to shift the scale per column, and we want it to decrease by a certain percentage, and I'm just going to say -3 because that's what I did for this one right here, and I think it looks pretty good. You can of course change that. So, and then we also want to scale the Y also, or our circles are going to be squished. So we're going to shift X per column -3 and shift Y per column -3 also. Let's just see what that does. Now we got to tell it how many times we want it to repeat. As I said, we don't, so you do that down here. This is rows in the first box and columns in the second box. We only want one row, so we're going to leave that. We just want one row going across. But we want a bunch of columns, so I'm going to tell it to do 50 columns. Now we'll just click on Create, and you can see that made a lot of little circles going from big to very, very tiny. The spacing is fairly spread out, and that's what I wanted to show you on this next tab. So I'm going to press Control Z to undo the tiled clones I just made, and then I'm going to go back to the Shift tab, and I'm going to tell it to shift X per column. I want it to shift the circles closer together. So I'm going to just type in -40%. Now I'll tell it to create again. Okay. So it still doesn't look the way we want it to, but it's a little closer, right? We're going to go to a further step and space these out evenly. But that's good for the tile clone, so I'm just going to close that box. All right. Now, before we go any further with this, I have to show you that when you use Create Tile Clones, your first one is done twice. I can drag that off and you can see there's another circle underneath it. we need to get rid of the original. All of these, if I click on any of these and look down here at my info bar, it tells me that's a clone, that's a clone. All of these are going to be clones, right? If I click on this first one, it tells me that's a clone. So the one that's behind it is the original. To get to that one without having to delete or shift this first one and then put it back, I'm just going to hold down the Alt key and click on that again. Now you can see down here it says circle in layer 1. That's the original, and we just want to delete that. It won't do our subsequent steps if we still have the original there, because right now the original is linked. So if I'm on the original, I can actually change the color of that and it'll change all of them. Okay, so the original is still linked, and before we do anything else we just have to delete it. So I'm going to press delete on the keyboard. Now if I click, I see there's not one behind it. Control Z to put it back, and all of these are just going to say circle. They've all been changed to individual objects now. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of these couple of little tiny ones on the end. I'm just going to select those and press delete because they're just too small. Alright, now what we want to do is we want to line these up so there's equal spacing in between the circles. So all I'm going to do is select all of them, and I'm going to press Control Shift A on the keyboard to open my Align panel. Alright, we don't want to align them. They're already all lined up on the center, but we do want to distribute them. So here's the distribute tools, and there's a couple of different options. Distribute left edges equidistant, centers equidistantly. The one I want here is to make gaps between the objects equal. So I'm going to click on that. Okay, and you see it spread them out so that the gaps between them are equal. I think they're a little bit too close together, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click that last one, and just using the arrow keys I'm going to drag it off to the side and select them all again, and now again tell it to distribute equally. Okay, and you can just keep doing this. You can use the arrow key and then keep doing that until they're spaced apart the distance you want them to be, and that's just going to be a personal, decision. Alright, now what we want to do is select them all and make them one object by unioning them together. So path union. Okay, now they're all one object. Next thing we want to do is to draw the path that we're going to put these on, and to do that we're going to use the Bezier tool. And as I said before, we're going to click on this, Create Spiro Path. Alright, this is a fun tool. If you've never used it before, it takes some practice, but you can do some really pretty swirly designs with it. For this particular project, we want to make sure that the shape is set to none. It has several different shapes. It'll make an ellipse, it'll taper your stroke from fat to thin or from thin to fat, but here we just want it to have no taper at all, so we're going to say none. Alright. Then we're just going to draw with this, and like I said, it takes practice. For this, you don't click and drag, you just click, click, and you see how it's starting to make a spiral path. Click, click, and then double click to finish it. And it takes practice. There's videos you can watch that tell you how to use this also. Alright. One thing we have to do to this is we have to change it to a path first. If I go to the node tool and hover over it. Oh, it's not showing up this time. Anyway, if I go to path, stroke to path, you can see it does a weird thing, and that's not what we want. But for this, oh, here we go. Now if I hover over it, you can see the actual path is weird looking, and Inkscape has applied some sort of algorithm to it to make it swirly. So we want to click that, select it, and then do path, object to path. Now if I hover over it, you see that's the actual path, and that's what we want. So very important, when you draw your spiro spline, your spiro path, you definitely want to do path, object to path to make sure it's a path. Okay, I'm going to size these circles to make it look to me like it's going to fit on this a little bit better, because right now I think it'll be too big. So I'm just going to shrink that down a little by holding down Control and Shift and drag in the corners. We'll see how this looks. Alright, finally, the final step. First thing I want to do is make sure that my circle design, the thing that I'm going to put on the path, is on the top layer. We drew the circles first and then drew the path, so this is going to actually be behind. And if I drag it down there, you can see the circles are behind the path. So to put them on top, you can use these tools up here. I like keyboard shortcuts, so I just select the item I want on top and I press the home key on the keyboard, and you can see that that moved my circles to the top layer. All right. Now we want, and it's very important that they be on top. If they're not on top, it won't work. It does something very strange. So now we select both of these, and now we're going to go to extensions, generate from path, pattern along path. All right. For the options here, we want the copies of our pattern. That's how many copies of this pattern that it's going to put on the path. We only want it to be a single copy. We want the deformation type to be snake. The other option is ribbon. That's cool, but it's not what we want for this. Space between copies doesn't matter because we're hoping that we'll only fit one copy of this pattern on the path. We don't want it to have any offset or any tangential offset, and the rest of these we can leave blank. So now we'll just press apply, and there you go. There is our pattern along the path. And I can actually do my same trick, hold down the Alt key and click on that again to select the path that's behind, and I can delete it, and there is my pattern along a path. So if I undo that, I'm going to close that, I can draw a different path. I'll click on my Bezier tool again, and still I'm on my spiro spline. Just do a simple path like that. And again, we just drew that so our circles are behind, so we have to press home to bring those to the top. Now just do the same thing. Select both, extensions, generate from path, pattern along a path. All of the settings here should be the same. Single copy, snake. That doesn't matter because we're not only putting one pattern on, no offset. And just say apply. Now there you see our path was too short. So here's what we'll do. We'll undo. Let's see. And I'm just going to hold down Shift and Control and make my path a little bit longer. And then do the same thing. Okay. So there you go. So I know it went pretty fast. Hopefully if you want to do something like this, you can watch it a couple of times and follow along, and eventually get all the steps down. And it's actually a good way to make, and I suppose you could use different shapes also, the same technique. I'm not sure. You guys are probably more creative than I am and can come up with something. But let me know if you have any questions. You can find me on Facebook, several groups that I'm involved with. Thanks for watching.